Good day to Dr. Puspa. So today, me, Rosaaliya and my partner, Siti Nur Fatiha, are going to present about our contrastive analysis on the Syai Pulasan. So without wasting our time, let's begin with the justification of selecting the storybook. We chose Pulasan Yang Pemalu, the Syai Pulasan, by Firas Firzana and Nazri Hasliani because it is a bilingual children's storybook that presents parallel texts in both Malay and English. So this makes it very suitable for our contrastive analysis because we are able to directly compare how the same ideas and meanings are expressed in two different languages. Besides that, the story uses simple, clear, and easy to understand language, and it is very helpful for us because it makes it easier to identify and analyze linguistic features without being too complicated. It also allows us to focus on key areas such as morphology, syntax, and grammar in a more systematic way. Another reason we chose this book is because it contains familiar vocabulary and everyday expressions, especially related to fruits like pulasan. This makes the content more relatable and easier to understand while still providing useful examples for linguistic analysis. Overall, we feel that this storybook is suitable for our project because it is engaging, age-appropriate, and provides clear bilingual data. It helps us to clearly observe and compare the similarities and differences between Malay and English in a relevant and practical way.
Hi, I will begin our presentation today with the first category, which is morphology, the study of how words are built. The first sentence we chose to analyze is Segugus pulasan mengintai di sebalik rimbunan daun, and the English version is a bunch of pulasans picked out from behind the leaves. Our very first example looks at the translation of a specific action verb from the story. The English text uses the phrase picked out, while the Malay text uses the word mengintai. So if we look at the morphological and semantic similarities, both expressions represent a single cohesive action, which is the act of looking secretly at something. And furthermore, in terms of sentence structure, both picked out and mengintai function perfectly as the main verb of their respective sentences. However, how these two languages structurally build this meaning is completely different. It comes down to a contrast between external word building and internal word building. So what is this? So as highlighted in orange on the slide, English utilizes a phrasal verb. To create a phrasal verb, English takes a base verb, which is pick, and adds an external particle or direction word, which is out. So this means that English builds the complexity of the action externally using a separate neighbor word. That's why pick and out has a space between them. So now we look at the Malay word highlighted in blue. So Malay takes a completely different morphological approach called a fixation. So instead of adding a separate different word, Malay builds the meaning internally. So what does it mean? It takes the root word, which is intai, and attaches the active prefix men, men, but phonologically morphs into meng, meng, to match the root word. So the grammar and the action are tightly bound into a single joined word family. That's why mengintai is one word. It doesn't have any space between them. So in short, for this example, it clearly demonstrates an important morphological contrast. English grammar may use extra or external words like particles to modify how a verb works, which is called phrasal verb, whereas in Malay, we just use a system of prefixes to achieve the exact same goal.
Next, we analyze the linguistic item under morphology, specifically inflectional morpheme. So the sentence from the storybook is, namun sebaik sahaja Adam menoleh, pulasan-pulasan itu segera menyorok. However, as soon as Adam looked up, the pulasans quickly hid themselves. So the example in Malay is pulasan-pulasan, while the English translation is pulasans. The similarity between both words is that they indicate plurality, meaning more than one pulasan, and both function as nouns in the sentence. However, the difference lies in how plurality is formed in each language. So in English, the word pulasans is formed by adding the suffix s to the noun pulasan. This is an example of an inflectional morpheme because the suffix only changes the grammatical form from singular to plural without changing the word class. In contrast, Malay forms plurality through full reduplication. The word pulasan-pulasan is created by repeating the whole word pulasan. Unlike English, Malay does not add a plural suffix like s. So this shows that both languages express the same meaning, which is plurality, but they use different morphological processes. Lastly, under morphology, we analyze derivational morpheme. So the sentence chosen is tambahan pula, pulasan dan rambutan buah bermusim. Moreover, pulasans and rambutans are seasonal fruits. So the example in Malay is bermusim, while the English translation is seasonal. The similarity between both words is that they are formed by adding affixes to words related to season, and both words also describe something connected to seasons. However, the difference lies in the type of affix used in each language. In English, the word seasonal is formed by adding the suffix al to the noun season to create an adjective. This is an example of derivational morphology because the affix creates a new word and changes its word class from noun to adjective. In contrast, Malay forms bermusim by adding the prefix ber to the noun musim. Instead of using a suffix like English, Malay uses a prefix to create a descriptive word related to seasons. This shows that although both languages use affixation to form new meanings, English and Malay apply different derivational processes. Now, for predicting the difficulty in learning for second language learners, one of the obstacles is incorrect word formation, where learners might form the wrong word, such as using seasoning or season instead of seasonal because the words look similar. And then difficulty in recognizing word class change, where learners may also not realize that season is a noun while seasonal is an adjective, so they may use the word incorrectly in sentences. Personally, I think this happens because learners often focus more on memorizing vocabulary than understanding how words are actually formed. When learning a second language, especially English, affixes can sometimes be confusing because one small change can completely change the function of the word. So to help learners overcome these difficulties, teachers can introduce words in groups such as season, seasonal, and seasonality, so learners can clearly see the relationship between the words. And then teachers can encourage morphological analysis practice where they break words into smaller parts like base words and affixes. For example, learners can analyze season plus the suffix al that equals to seasonal, and this can help them understand both the meaning and the word formation process better. Next, we move on to the second linguistic element, which is syntax. Syntax refers to how words are arranged and structured in a sentence. For this section, the first item we analyze is possessive construction. So, the sentence chosen from the storybook is, dia bimbang jika soalan itu menyinggung perasaan Pulasan dan ahli keluarganya. He was worried the question might hurt Pulasan and their family's feelings. So the example from the Malay text is ahli keluarganya, while the English translation is their family's feelings. The similarity between these phrases is that both are used to show possession or ownership. In both languages, the phrases indicate that the feelings belong to the family. Therefore, both Malay and English use possessive structures to express a relationship between people and things. However, the difference lies in how possession is formed syntactically in each language. In English, possession is shown using the apostrophe s, as seen in family's feelings. This structure places the possessor before the noun and directly marks possession using punctuation and grammatical structure. In contrast, Malay expresses possession through word order and the clitic nya as shown in ahli keluarganya. Unlike English, Malay does not use an apostrophe structure to indicate possession. Instead, the possessor follows the head noun and the element nya helps indicate ownership. So this comparison shows that even though both languages express the same meaning, Malay and English use different syntactic patterns and possessive constructions to show ownership.
Moving on to the example under syntax category. So we are looking at a larger sentence structure, which is syntactic restructuring. So in this example, we are comparing the Malay sentence, which is biji pulasan boleh direbus, dipanggang dan dijadikan serbuk minuman seperti koko. And then the English translation, which is Pulasan seed can be made into powder like cocoa when boiled and roasted. So let's begin with a very strong syntactic similarity, which is both languages actively choose to employ a passive voice construction instead of the active voice. So in Malay, this is achieved through the passive prefix di in the verbs like direbus, dipanggang, and dijadikan. While in English, this is mirrored using the passive verb phrases like can be made and then the implied when they are boiled and roasted. And how both languages achieve passive voice is the same, which is through agent deletion. So in this context, who is doing the boiling and roasting does not matter. That's why it's not mentioned in the sentence. So by deleting the actor or the agent or the doer of the action, both successfully shift the sentence's focus onto the object of the sentence instead of the subject, which is the object or in the sentence is the seed or the biji pulasan, who is receiving the action. However, even though they agree on the passive voice, they completely clash when it comes to clause and phrase restructuring. As you can see, highlighted with the arrows on the slide, Malay syntax follows a chronological order. So in Malay, it lists the action in the exact logical sequence. So you must first do the process, which is rebus and panggang, before you get the final result, which is dijadikan serbuk. So it moves from process to result. While in English, on the other hand, it completely flips this layout by following a result first order. So in English, the English grammar prefers to front load the main independent clause to get straight to the point. So therefore, the English syntax structures the sentence by leading immediately with the final outcome, which is can be made into powder. And then later explain the preparation process, which is when boiled and roasted. So when boiled and roasted is a subordinate clause of in the sentence. So it moves backward from result and then the process. So in short, this example proves that Malay syntax aligns the grammar with the physical timeline of the action, while English syntax values the structural prominence. So it prioritizes the final result of the sentence and then later explain the steps. Our next example in this category examines the question formation. So bagaimana boleh dapat nama Pulasan and its English counterpart? How did Pulasans get their name? So looking at the similarities, both sentences are fundamentally WH questions. So they both begin with an interrogative question, which is how in English and bagaimana in Bahasa Melayu. And they both share the exact same communicative goal, which is to discover the origin behind the name of the fruit. However, the structural difference in how these two languages actually construct a question is major, because it is due to a grammatical requirement in English known as auxiliary verb. So as you can see in the underlined part of the slide, the English grammar does not allow you to just say how Pulasans got their name in a standard question. Instead, in English syntax, it requires you to use a helping verb or auxiliary verb to carry the tense. So because the word get is a lexical verb that cannot move on its own, English brings in like a dummy auxiliary verb, which is did, and put it right before the subject. So the helping verb or auxiliary verb did serves as a purely structural purpose. So it indicates the sentence in the past tense. However, if we look at the Malay syntax, the structure is completely different because Malay is a zero auxiliary language. So Malay grammar does not require a helping verb to make an interrogative sentence grammatically correct. The question moves directly from interrogative word, which is bagaimana, and straight into the main verb, which is boleh dapat. So the sentence remains grammatically correct even without the helping verb. So briefly, this example highlights a critical syntactic divergence, which is English syntax is highly dependent on auxiliary verbs like did to structurally lock a question into place. But on the other hand, Malay syntax operates on zero auxiliary structure because it relies purely on the natural order of the interrogative word and the core verbs to form a complete question. As for predicting the difficulty in learning for second language learners, we have the challenge, which is the requirement of the English language having auxiliary verb like this, do, and does in interrogative structures is a massive stumbling block for a Malay who is learning English as second language, because Malay is a zero auxiliary language that forms question cleanly. For example, bagaimana boleh dapat? nama Pulasan. So the concept of adding an extra or artificial helper verb that carries no concrete meaning feels entirely redundant to a learner. As a result, some Malay speakers frequently drop the auxiliary verb entirely when they produce an English sentence, leading to a common fossilized error such as how Pulasans get their name instead of how did Pulasans get their name. So our recommendation to overcome these issues, we have two. Firstly is fill the gap frames. So teachers can use structural visual frames on worksheets where the auxiliary slot is explicitly carved out at the front of the question. So it forces the learners to physically fill this blank space slot to prevent them from skipping them. And the second recommendation is using math style formula. So we can train students to treat English WH question as a rigid mathematical formula. So we can put it as like this, like the WH question with the when, where, what, and then plus the auxiliary verb, whether it's do, does, or did, and then the subject, and then the main verb. So reinforcing this sequence help the student to avoid the natural instinct to translate directly from Malay word structures.
Moving on to the third linguistic element, which is grammar. Grammar refers to the set of rules that govern how words are arranged and combined to form meaningful phrases and sentences. For this section, the first item we analyze is noun phrase structure. So the sentence chosen from the storybook is, kulit dan biji pulasan boleh mencegah jangkitan bakteria. The skin and seeds of pulasans can prevent bacterial infections. The example in Malay is jangkitan bacteria, while the English translation is bacterial infections. The similarity between both phrases is that they are noun phrases used to refer to a specific meaning, which is infections caused by bacteria. In both languages, the words combine to function as one unit of meaning rather than being interpreted separately. This shows that both Malay and English rely on noun phrase structures to give more detailed information about a noun. However, the difference lies in how the noun phrases are structured grammatically in each language. In English, bacterial infections follows an adjective plus noun structure where bacterial acts as an adjective that describes and modifies the noun infections. This structure places descriptive information before the main noun, which is a common pattern in English noun phrases. In contrast, Malay uses a noun plus noun structure in jangkitan bacteria. Here, jangkitan is the head noun and bacteria follows it to specify the type or source of the infection. Unlike English, Malay does not change the noun into an adjective form but instead uses another noun to provide additional meaning. So this comparison shows that although both languages express the same idea, they differ in how they organize information within noun phrases. English tends to use modifiers before the noun, while Malay often places the specifying noun after the head noun.
Moving on to our next example, we are now looking at how pronouns function differently across Malay and English. Specifically, we are looking at the sentence, kami malu kerana kami tidak cantik, awak pun tidak kenal kami. And its English translation, we are shy because we aren't as beautiful, you don't even know us. So first, let's look at the similarity. So in both languages, the pronouns being used serve as the exact same linguistic function. They are both the first person plural exclusive pronouns. This means that both pronoun kami and we refer to the speaker as a group while explicitly excluding the person they are addressing, which in this context awak or you. So awak and you is not included in the pronoun kami or we. However, when we look at the grammatical structure, we see a major difference in how these two languages handle syntactic slots, whether it's the subject or the object of the sentence. So as you can see in the slide, English is a case-variant language for pronouns. This means an English pronoun must completely change its form depending whether it sits in the subject slots or the object slots. So when it is at the front of the clause acting as the subject, English forces to use the pronoun we. But at the moment the exact same group of people moves to the back of the clause to become the object receiving the action, the word becomes us, not anymore using the pronoun we, but using the pronoun us, because now it is an object. While in contrast, Malay pronouns do not really care about these grammatical slots. They are structurally rigid. Whether the pronoun is operating as the subject or an object, it's still gonna be kami. Next, let's look at our example under grammar section. So we are examining how English and Malay handle multiple description or adjectives for a single noun for this example. So the source text reads, Adam nampak rambut pendek dan keras pada Pulasan, which was translated into English as Adam noticed the stiff and short hairs on Pulasan. So if you look at the grammatical similarity first, both languages allow a speaker to string multiple adjectives together using a conjunction, which is dan and to describe a single target noun, which is rambut and hairs. However, the structural divergence here is interesting because it boils down to a rule in English grammar known as OSASCOMP. So for those who need a quick refresher, OSASCOMP is an acronym that dictates the strict subconscious order that adjective must follow in the English language. So for OSASCOMP, first O is opinion, the first S is size, A is for age, the second S is for shape, C is color, O is origin, M is material, and P is purpose. So in our English example, the translator chose the phrase stiff and short hairs. So stiff represents opinion and short represents size. So according to a native English syntactic intuition, the opinion takes precedence over size when it is used in where we have multiple adjectives from different categories. So in this context, we put opinion, which is stiff, and then size, which is short. So if a speaker were to flip the arrangement and say short and stiff hairs, it feels unnatural or awkward to a native English ear because it violates the internal grammatical hierarchy that they have. So now let's look at the Malay grammar, because we can see that Malay is entirely flexible about the adjective orders. Malay grammar does not possess a rigid structural sequencing rule like OSASCOMP for its adjective. So in the source text, the author wrote pendek dan keras, putting size before opinion. But a Malay speaker could just easily flip the phrase to say keras dan pendek. So it would still remain perfectly grammatical, natural, and correct. So there is no awkwardness in shifting the sequence. So it doesn't matter if we say pendek dan keras or keras dan pendek. They are both correct. So in short, this example. Moving on to the next section, which is predicting the difficulty in learning for second language learners. So to be honest, I don't even have to look for an example for this one. I can look at my own journey as a learner. Growing up in school, I had absolutely no idea that a structural hierarchy like OSASCOMP even existed. So when I was writing or speaking in English, I don't even follow a formula. I simply just type all the different adjectives from different category based on what felt right or sounded correct to me at the time. It wasn't until I did my foundation in TESOL that I was explicitly introduced to OSASCOMP, and then I realized that there was a strict grammatical rule governing those choices. So because in Malay, we are totally flexible with our adjectives. So it allows us to say pendek dan keras or keras dan pendek without any structural penalty. So for Malay learners, they don't have that internal compass for English adjective ordering. So that's why we suffer from negative transfer because we subconsciously carrying that native flexibility over into English adjective ordering. So this is why many students write phrases that are grammatically understandable but can sound structurally awkward to a native speaker. So how can we as future teachers assist these second language learners? So first, we need to bridge the gap early. So as teachers, we need to introduce the acronym early using color-coded text to help learners visualize the mandatory hierarchy, or just make them simply memorize the word or SASCOM, and always remind them that size matters. So size always is the first S, which is an OSASCOM. So S, size, and then the second S is the shape. So size matters, size comes first. And secondly, since many learners relies on what feels right, like me, we need to train their linguistic intuition by using rapid exposure classroom tools like Kahoot, because it allows students to rearrange the scrambled adjectives in real time. So this explicitly built that internal rhythm of English grammar. So hopefully this can shift them away from random guessing and move towards a structural accuracy.
To conclude, English and Malay share identical communicative goals as both languages aim to convey meaning effectively in context. However, they differ in how this meaning is structured linguistically. English relies more on external word building, strict category rules, and rigid slot dependencies. In contrast, Malay thrives on internal affixation, structural flexibility, and zero auxiliary frameworks. So as educators, recognizing these structural differences is important because it helps us understand that many student errors are not random mistakes but predictable results of cross-linguistic transfer from their first language. Therefore, by applying the recommended pedagogies, we can better support learners in bridging the gap between Malay and English effectively. So that's all from us. Thank you.